Hello and welcome to this Google Plus Hangout entitled What Makes an Innovation Great? My name is Matt Hunter. I'm Chief Design Officer at the Design Council, and we're here because we've recently launched the Spark Innovation Fund. It's an attempt to find a great sort of cohort of inventors and innovators here in Britain and help them make some great products that can really work well for people. So we're here to really understand a little bit more about innovation, invention, product development. And I've got some fantastic panelists with me to answer some of these questions. So immediately to my left, we've got Mark Sheehan. He's the inventor in residence at the British Library. Not many of you may know how much the British Library does to support innovation. They have a huge wealth of knowledge, and Mark himself, as the inventor in residence, has a fascinating background in terms of product development and patenting, and real expert in plastics, I understand. So we'll hear more from him about that. And then further to my left, Duncan Fitzsimmons, the inventor of the Morph wheel, the world's first foldable wheelchair wheel. And Duncan has a sort of fascinating background in sort of mechanical engineering and design. He's the founder of the 17th studio, and he also has some great experience to bear in bringing radical innovations to market, really making them real. And then thirdly, we've got Claire Mitchell. Claire is inventor of Chili Peeps baby products. And I'm sure she'll tell us more about the products as we go on, but as any parent will tell you when out and about, suddenly finding a way to safely feed your child infant formula is a challenging thing. And amazingly, perhaps for an area which apparently has so many products in it, Claire found a gap in the market and found that there was a really wonderful gap for a new product, which is essentially a way to connect a spout, something to drink from, to the bottles themselves. So Claire will tell us more about that amazing journey she's been on. And then remotely we have Rob Law. Rob Law is the inventor of the Trunky ride-on suitcase. And I'm sure many of you, if you're in airports, will have seen children very happily sitting on their trunkies or being wheeled around and therefore being usefully distracted, while at the same time feeling like they've got a little sense of control with their luggage. A wonderful product, Trunky, and many of you will have seen, and Rob will tell us more about that. And of course, more importantly, his journey in making Trunky as the successful brand that it is today. So before we get started, I'll say a little bit more about the format. What we're going to do is have a panel discussion for about 20 minutes where the key questions that we think underpin or answer the question, what is a good idea, what's a great invention, we'll try and illustrate those for you with the panel. And then after that 20 minutes, we'll have a more wide-ranging discussion, taking questions via Twitter and engaging some of our online participants, which who I will introduce later on. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going with the discussion. I should announce to you the URL if you want to find out more information, the web address for Spark, and that is designcouncil.org.uk/Spark. And there you'll find all the information you need about the program and what potentially is on offer for the successful applicants. Secondly, for the purposes of Twitter, we're using the hashtag #SparkInnovation, all one word. And then, in addition, the Design Council's Twitter handle is @DesignCouncil. And again, if you follow that or connect with that, that'll be useful, both for the Hangout and, of course, ongoing, if you have some ongoing interest in Spark. So I think that's about all for now. There's the opportunity to ask questions via the chat window, and we'll try and answer them as many as we can here today, as well as obviously using Twitter. So, to my panelists. We've essentially got 4 questions that we're going to go through. So starting with the first, Design Council Spark, as I've already said, is a new product innovation fund to uncover the UK's next great inventors. But it begs the question, why is innovation important? And also, why is a program such as Spark important in order to help inventors and innovators in their journey? So I'll direct that first at Mark, because the British Library obviously does have an interest in innovation in general. So can you tell me a bit more about why innovation is so important and why support is so much needed?
Okay, innovation is key sometimes to success, I believe. If you can make things cheaper or better, or ideally both, I think you have a real commercial chance to make a success, particularly on a global scale. I mean, we have to think globally from day one, I believe. Support is a major issue. No one's an island, and it's a very complex thing to try and make money in this game, having an idea and actually making money at the end of it. So as much support as you can get in between as possible, because the learning curve is really difficult, and it's better to take advice, maybe even get a mentor on board if you can earlier on, and you'll just save yourself a lot of time and money and heartache if you can get support earlier on. And that's really why I'm here. I like organizations which support inventors. I'm involved with lots of them. We need support very much before we go down a route which perhaps we can't get back from, make mistakes. There's a lot of sharks out there, so learn from other people's mistakes. Don't always agree with what they say, but it gives you much more to work with if you understand where people have gone wrong before or whether they've been successful.
Yeah.
And innovation is great, I tell you. It's the way we can get out of this economic climate and actually do well on a global scale.
And I think what's interesting is that, especially in this country, we see ever more support, especially for high technology, perhaps software-led startups, apps and all that sort of thing for smartphones, but less so in terms of physical products. Perhaps Duncan or Claire, I mean, to what extent did you find there was support available to you when you wanted it?
There's support out there, but it's often piecemeal. So it will be focused on, particularly on IP or on a certain stage of manufacturing or helping getting your product or idea put out there. But what's often missing is that holistic view that you need to be able to have to successfully take a product forward, and to be able to weave together all of those different aspects and facets of what you need to understand. Being able to merge together the technical feasibility and the business model and get all of that nicely wrapped up is very, very important.
Yeah. And indeed, part of that holistic approach, Claire, it strikes me, is almost the emotional support that's needed as well. I mean, it's not just about sort of knowledge and networks. It's actually one hell of a journey for an individual to take. And no doubt in your experience, you had loads of people who were saying, carry on going, this is amazing, even though you probably hit some brick walls every now and again.
Oh, it's like being on a roller coaster. I mean, massive highs and tremendous lows. You don't really know what you're stepping on, but once that ride starts, you can't get off until you get to the very end. But where is the end? There is help available out there, but part of it, especially in my situation where I hadn't done this before, was not knowing where to find it, who to go to, So that's why I think the Spark Innovation Fund is absolutely brilliant opportunity, because that support is there, and I wish that I'd had that at the beginning, because you need to have people with their fingers and toes out there, so that you know what you're looking for. Whereas I didn't have a clue where to start.
The unknown,
yes,
as it's sometimes termed. Absolutely, that's very useful. Thank you. Well, I think Rob, I'd like to turn to you next, because I think that our second question really gets to the heart of how we define good ideas. What we've said in our sort of applications is we can think of. There are three words: viability, desirability, and feasibility. And we wanted to unpack these words a little bit more to explain them. And I wanted to come to you first. So viability, for me, always expresses the idea that a really good idea that's technically feasible, that we'll talk about in a little while later in this conversation, is all very well. But ultimately, you need to turn this into a business, or you need to have the cash flow that's required to even get to the start line. Can you say a little bit more about how an idea has to be surrounded by an awful lot more in order actually to turn it into a real business?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea is the easy part. Many people have great ideas, the next big thing, but I always imagine the idea as the seed. But to turn that idea into a young tree, to get it to market, as you say, is a huge amount of work. I'll disagree with you that you need cash to do that. In this day and age, there's some very innovative ways of being able to get products to market. It obviously helps a lot, but I started my business with virtually no money. But really, the first test for an idea, to bring your point about viability, is really, does it address a need in the market? Or is it just solving a problem you personally have experienced, and actually 99% of the population or the market don't experience that, and therefore there really isn't much of a need for that product. So far too many inventors get too caught up with their great idea. They don't share it with anyone. They're really protective of it, and they therefore are basically cutting the idea in half. They won't be able to develop a good idea that people want without talking to your target users, whether that be consumers, businesses, or whoever your target user is. So to really get that viability question right, you've got to talk to your market and listen to their feedback and evolve and develop your product, because no one, not even the greatest designer in the world, will get the product right first. It takes many, many iterations.
And that's, I mean, it's really interesting, some of the things you were saying there. On the one hand, about this sense of intellectual properties, it's known, the ideas, to what extent do we need to protect things, because actually ideas can be stolen, but at the same time we need to be open, we need to share them if they're to be improved. There's quite an interesting tension there, isn't there? And again, in creating a viable business model, how open, when is it appropriate to be open, and when is it appropriate to be closed?
Yeah, that's a very difficult line to walk. It's a knife edge sometimes, but I guess thinking back to when I developed the Trunky product, I went to a toy fair in 2003. Was very cautious about talking to large toy companies, so I just went to the medium-sized toy companies to see if I could try and find a partner who'd take the product on. Yeah, without the feedback from the market in the first place, I did talk to parents, I did talk to children to develop that idea to a point where it was more manufacturable.
Yeah. Perhaps coming to Duncan, I mean, to what extent do you feel that product innovation is sort of uniquely susceptible to this idea of needing to protect intellectual property? I mean, often there's some people in the service industry say, no, you can't protect it anyway, you just need to move as quickly as you can, speed is your friend. Whereas in the product industries, it seems there is more importance put around this idea of protecting ideas.
Yeah, there certainly is, and part of that's around the fact that quite often product ideas, you just need to see them to understand, the essence of what that product is. You quite often don't have the luxury of being able to hide the secret inner workings away inside so much, and that's why the various different ways of protecting an idea can be really important. It's important to know which sort of protection to go for. Sometimes a patent isn't the best route to take, but if you can get whatever protection is appropriate, then that frees you up to be able to show the product to people, to be able to get that critical feedback. Because what you don't want to do is keep your head down too long and then end up too far down the line without having learned some key things you could have learned from showing that product to people.
So that act of protection allows you to feel more confident about sharing in that
Absolutely,
way.
yeah.
And this indeed is an area, Mark, where you're deeply experienced.
Yes, I mean, intellectual property can be very expensive. You always take advice early on, ideally what I would call advice from not just patent attorneys, but perhaps from people who have been through the process. I don't like the patent system with a passion because they kept me poor for many years, but it's a double-edged sword because I make money from selling licenses globally. You're quite right, you don't have to patent everything. Some things aren't patentable and shouldn't be patented. Sometimes you can use copyright straight off, or design registration will do, or trademarks, etc. But the key is to get advice earlier on and make sure that you can protect it as much as you can. In an ideal world, sometimes you can be really lucky if it's sort of difficult to back engineer, you can keep it secret. And the know-how is your intellectual property, which you can be licensed or protect your interests in the product. But I don't like the system as it is, but it's here and we have to use it.
And which further shows the need, I suppose, for support to help people navigate a system that has its pros and cons, and so people do need support.
I see lots of things which shouldn't be patented, and they cost an absolute fortune, and I despair because it would have been better spent on developing the product.
So the other aspect that I thought, Rob, was very interesting in terms of your answer to the question around sort of viability was talking not just about intellectual properties we've just been exploring, but obviously around sort of money as well. And you were saying, usefully that actually money, cash in product development is perhaps less of it is needed than ever before. The barriers to entry are lowest. But Claire, I think it was interesting talking to you a little bit earlier about your journey in creating Chili Peeps, and obviously being new to product development, there are some interesting issues there for you about, I suppose, on the one hand, creating a viable business model, how you sell things, but again, even just the cash required to afford the tooling to make the product itself was something, again, that's unusual compared with software development.
Oh, I mean, I wish I'd known Rob when I started, because if he'd have told me I didn't need cash, I'd have asked him, how do you do it? It has the input, the cash input that we had to put into our business was phenomenal, and we had no idea of what we were stepping onto. But once we'd started, it's very difficult to stop once you've started to put cash in. But the ultimate part of it was producing a plastic product, was the tooling. You know, it's phenomenal, the cost of tooling. I wish I'd had a fabric product, because then, you know, the startup costs are almost nil. But we are where we are, and so my biggest advice to people is to make sure, or to understand and make sure they know the timescales and the costs involved of IP, of tooling, of manufacturing, the whole production process, because once you need to know what you're getting into so that you can go and find funding if it's available, or you can make sure that you have the cash behind you, because that's the thing that slows you down, is having the cash to take the next step.
Rob, do you want to respond in any way?
I should probably point out I did have one major advantage for an inventor, and that's being a trained product designer, and Duncan probably too, as a mechanical engineer. He was able to overcome the first hurdle, and that's designing the product. Just to pick up on Claire's point on tooling, yes, it is very expensive, but quite often you can negotiate with tool makers and manufacturers to amortize that tooling cost, so they can charge you more per unit to capture that cost over a period of time back. So there are different ways of doing things, certainly, but actually knowing that to start with is half the problem, isn't it? But that's where Design Council Spark really comes in, because it gives you that access to designers, to various people who can help you figure this all out. And once you've got the product to market, the biggest problem then is operational, I think, rather than sales and marketing. You've then got to get your product from X to Z, store it somewhere. And most of my time in the first year of trading was all taken up with operational stuff rather than sales and marketing.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rob. I think that really nicely sort of rounds out some of those issues associated with viability, this idea, and some issues around intellectual property, around sort of cash and sort of money in general and access to finance, but also the fact that one needs an operational organization. You need an organization around a product in order to deliver it and maintain it effectively in a marketplace. So the second question we wanted to move on to was around feasibility. And so this is obviously talking a little bit more about technology, about how we exploit technologies in order to give our innovations competitive edge. But at the same time, the implication is, especially in a startup process, that you can't invent a new technology here, probably. It's more that you're taking a technology that already exists in some form and applying it in a better way, or applying it, you know, to a new market. So, Duncan, could you tell us a little bit more about, given again, you know, as we've just heard, you are a trained mechanical engineer, you should know something about technology and materials here. What do you think are some interesting challenges for startups when thinking about exploiting technology?
I think exactly as Rob mentioned, the idea is the easy part at the beginning, and I think the first big trap for everyone to be aware of is that you can, even when you've got to that first prototype stage, so you've had your idea, you've developed it, and you've got something that looks and works just like the real product, there's still at least 10 times more work to be done to get it to the stage where it's a product that someone wants to and can safely buy and use from a shop. And quite often that side of things is a bit of a hidden thing in a lot of people's sort of plans for their product idea. So being aware of that, being aware of the fact that there's a lot of work to be done, and then I think what's really important for people is to factor that into their plan for how they're developing their product, because sometimes, especially if you're innovating around a new technology, perhaps it's a new manufacturing process or a new way of doing something that is taking a material or a technology from one market, putting it into another, you're going to inevitably hit upon problems such as a manufacturer who makes your sort of product won't know how to do that process, or the other way around. So one thing is to be aware of and to plan for development time and money later on in the process to get to that stage. What you don't want to do is is force your original idea right through and end up with a product which has manufacturing problems or ends up too expensive compared with the competition as a result of manufacturing details. The thing that I'm incredibly passionate about is trying to get an element of elegance into the original idea. So be aware when you're coming up with your original idea that if it very elegantly and simply fits with a manufacturing process or fits with the way that products are made and sold, then your product will sail through compared with doing it in a sort of a way that spends less time looking at what comes next.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting what you were saying there. It reminded me a little bit that software, of course, we've got so used to the idea of the beta, the idea that you can put something out there that is incomplete. And yet with products, you can't really do that because you can't easily or at low cost upgrade products into the field, in the field. And also this idea, I think, as you were implying that it's often creating platforms. I mean, I suppose, Claire, interestingly, with your product, with Chili Peeps, you've got various interlocking components in order for your teats to sort of fit on different types of packaging. But once you've defined what all those threads and sizes are, you can't alter that. You've started to create a system. You've started to create your Lego. And so to some extent, as Duncan was saying, you need to create that very elegant, simple instance of a technology in order to make your product low cost and something that you can expand over time, because you don't have a second shot at this, really.
That's a really good point. Actually, when we started, we followed a concept that had wings, literally. It clamped down onto the carton, and it was unmanufacturable. It had 11 parts. We only have 4 now, so the tooling costs are a lot less. But actually, I do believe that good is good enough and get on, because I think what people do is they strive for perfection, but perfection is never there. There's always the next generation, there's always the next version, and actually good, if it does what you planned it to do, then get it out there and get it sold, because actually there will be another version that's coming along. We're already on version 2, so yes, you get to a certain stage, but actually good's good enough. Get it out there and get it on, let's get it sold.
Interesting. So Rob, was that the same for
you? Completely agree with Claire.
What went out there?
I mean, we're on our version 5. We've had the product in the market for almost 9 years now, and our 5th version launched in 2012, which is manufactured now in the UK and has some fantastic green credentials to it. But yeah, it's only when you get the product out there you really do understand what the problems are and how people tend to use it. So, great analogy for me was, although I designed it to be towed along, I didn't really envisage kids being towed along on the product, and that was just a use parents quickly adapted to use the product. So as soon as I saw more and more pictures of this, then it filtered into our marketing. So yeah, just get the product out, listen to the market, see what they say, and almost think of your first launch as a beta product, and you will have to carry on developing it, and you'll constantly have to carry on developing it. So it's never over.
I think it's so important to recognize, actually, even though plastic is so much less malleable than software, you could argue, still you need to get stuff out there. This is about dialogue with the marketplace. It's about learning. It's constantly iterating and improving. Very useful. I think finally we need to move on to the question of desirability that Rob, you also earlier on highlighted as one of the most important things, that a real trap sometimes can be for any innovator or inventor is to identify themselves as someone excited by an idea but not truly understand whether it meets someone else's needs or enough aggregate sort of other people's needs such that there's a real sizable market for whatever it is that you're doing. Claire, your story is in some ways a really common one, in that parents, and those of us that parents understand, despair of what needs to be done in order to bring children up. And so parents can identify that there's a gap in the market, so it's very much a personal experience for you. Could you tell us more about how you took that individual sort of epiphany, but still had to work out whether or not, was it just you who thought this, or actually was there an addressable market? It
was just me that thought this initially. I mean, I'm just a mum. I had a eureka moment, and I thought I had the next big thing. Brilliant. To get it to market, I I had no idea how to do that, but actually I kept it very secret whilst we were developing it, because that's kind of what you're told to do. So nobody knew about it until we decided that we needed funding to help us get it to market. We went, and one of the investors said, brilliant, but how do we know anybody's going to buy it? Nobody knows about you or the product. Go and prove it. Very difficult to prove a product when you can't, when you haven't got the money to manufacture it. So I had a think under the duvet for a month. How on earth do you do this? And then came out realizing if we entered an industry competition, we'd actually have an opportunity. They'd give me some brilliant feedback. We won that industry competition outright. And the industry told us it was a good idea and that to move forward. But actually, up to that point, nobody knew about it apart from us and our designers. And you do need to do market research. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it at all, but it just so happened that that was our way. I believed in it. I had passion, and I think that's a lot of it as well. You've got to really believe that your product does solve a problem for other people, and it does. I mean, the biggest thing once you've got it out there is actually your brand and getting it known by the public. You can have the best product, but if nobody knows about it, you've got a big issue. So actually, once you've got it out there, the biggest fight you've got is getting your brand known out there.
And there's something interesting there also, it strikes me, around saying it's an interesting product, but can you articulate it simply? What would the advert be like? What's the elevator pitch? You have to sort of explain it in an engaging story as much as to have an engaging product.
Oh, I've said it a million times. It's a teat that attaches directly to ready-made formula and water, so that when you're out and about with your baby, you can feed and rehydrate them. Genius.
So any other perspectives on that, on again, this relationship between a really successful product, but also getting the story out there that begins to build the brand and the values?
Yeah, could I key?
Sorry.
So just in my previous career as a product design consultant, I ended up in endless focus groups behind that one-way mirror, talking to the target market, and the brand managers I work with were hanging on every word they said. There is a massive pinch of salt to be taken with what people say, but sometimes, most often, they'll have some very valuable feedback too. So you really need to filter through what's being said and pull out the really useful stuff. But Claire's example is a great example of how you can sometimes do it without much market research, and you kind of got lucky with a really good idea. But what do I tell the guy who sent me a concept of a suitcase that turns into a deck chair? So you take your suitcase down to the beach to turn into a deck chair. It's the next great thing. Go and talk to some people about it.
The passion thing is important, because if you've got passion, then it's infectious. People around you become infected, and it's much easier to get people on board, like investors. So it's not a bad thing, as long as you don't overdo it. And also paranoia is another thing I see quite a lot of. People are told to keep it secret, and it's going to be stolen. Things aren't stolen often, and if they are, you can do things about it. Generally, at some stage, you have to let your baby go. Yeah, people have to know it exists. What you try and do, perhaps, is you protect it before you do that process. But I see lots of people who just can't let go. They're scared by the rumors and the media saying that these things are going to be stolen, and you've got to get beyond that. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's like leaving your kids at school for the first time. It's a wrench, yeah?
Very good. Thank you. Well, I mean, I think that's been a great discussion, and we'd like to begin to open it up now to our online participants, but also our wider audience in general. So please do continue to send questions in. I think we're getting already. Would any of our online participants like to make any further comments? We've got Emily, and we've got Satwinder, and we've got Freya. So Satwinder, hello.
Hi. Fascinating listening to the conversation, and for me, what's really interesting is that I think there are kind of 4 cultures that we're trying to encourage here. If we look at this in its broadest context, a culture of entrepreneurship, a culture of creativity, a culture of actually being able to communicate these ideas to lots of people in lots of different ways, and also the culture of making. And I think the best products come out of an understanding of how these different cultures might work together. And I think one of the challenges, and I think one of the special elements of the program, is that how do we encourage younger people to realize that these sets of values are really, really important, and that they can have a say, and that they can be involved in the development of new innovations and new ideas. And for me, what's really fascinating is that as a society, I think we don't place enough value on design. And for me, design and making and being inventive is just as important as philosophy, politics, and economics to the future prosperity of the country and the happiness of the nation. And for me, I think often these skills and this passion that we all have within this forum is often dismissed and marginalized because it's not seen as an academic activity. And I think often the kids, they sort of, they have these little sparks, they have the invention and the initiative, and a lot of that tends to be sort of washed away in early education, and those kids lose confidence. And I think what's great about this initiative is that hopefully we can bring that up to a higher level and celebrate these activities.
I think that's great. Thank you very much for saying that. I think it is incredibly important. Exactly, we recognise this broader opportunity for the UK and globally. I think not just to see making. I think we've seen more and more startups in the world, so we begin to get an idea of entrepreneurship, but perhaps only in the world of software. And meanwhile, perhaps too many people. And Sir James Dyson often talks about this, think of engineering as a sort of a more Victorian or 20th century thing. So this idea of making products is as exciting as making apps. Is something very much we wish to get across. And not only have some wonderful examples, some wonderful stories, and some wonderful exemplars as we have on our panel and elsewhere. So thanks very much for that, Setwinder.
I totally agree with what you're saying there as well, and I think that's one of the really interesting things about the Spark initiative is that when working on products and products that are central to a startup over the last few years, I've quite often found myself sitting in a team of 4 or 5 people who are amongst us all engineers and designers, perhaps a research scientist, someone who's fully into marketing, someone who's fully into finance and very sort of finance-orientated sort of entrepreneurialism. And it's essential to have all of that in order to take one of these innovation-led startups through to success. And one of the things that I feel the way that we go to school and go through university and so on, it very much puts us in a single channel. And you're talking about different cultures, and actually they are together the culture of creating a new product and a new innovative business. So yeah, it's really good to wherever possible bring all those things together in the way that Spark's doing.
I wondered if I could bring in Emily, that I know is online as well, picking up on that thread, because Emily, you're a product design student and you're the inventor of the Summer Bug Trike. And I was thinking, to what extent do you feel that what you're doing, trying to imagine new products and services, do you think you're more understood than people of my generation 20 years ago? Or does it still feel, as Satwinder was saying, like a slightly unusual thing where, of course, the British stereotype of the inventor is the man in the shed. Here you are, at least a young woman, not in a shed at a design school. But could you say a little bit more about what you feel the culture is, not only within your program, your design program around entrepreneurship, but also how you feel what you do is understood by your friends, family, or anyone else that you talk to?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually really interesting to bring in what maybe friends and family think about it, that it might be kind of, whether it's bespoke or only creating, one niche of products, and maybe, stories like Dyson is what everyone kind of associates with and immediately jumps to. But yeah, I just think it's such a shame when you go to maybe design degree shows and there's so many fantastic ideas out there, but how often do they just stand, remain as a concept or as a concept board or at an exhibition, but never actually make it into the market? And I think, I think design education is making a lot of advances in that, and certainly here we are kind of really supported to think about business as well. But in terms of, I still think there is a gap between, I am going to leave uni in 6 months as a qualified product designer, and I still don't think at this stage, I don't have the experience to actually make that jump. And it sounds like a lot of the learning actually happens on the job through all the stories I've heard. So yeah, I just think, is there I think a couple of people picked up on this morning that we need to learn not only from the experts, from people who've been through it, and can we learn just as much from people's failures and difficulties, and actually is there a point when you should stop and actually say, no, actually this isn't going to work, rather than just keeping on pushing it through.
Another very interesting point, building on one of our previous parts of the conversation around how much do you share and how much do you have private. We were talking about intellectual property, but clearly the narrative about success and failure is just as important. Because if all that we ever hear in the world of invention and innovation are the great success stories, admittedly with some tales of trial and tribulation all the way through, nevertheless they'll have a rosy sort of glow to them. But in fact, actually, we need to hear a little bit more about quite how tall the brick walls were that people had to run through. And most successful entrepreneurs have run through brick walls in their time, I think.
I think you're allowed to make mistakes, as long as you learn from them and try again. That's the thing. It's you can't give up at the first hurdle. There's always going to be hurdles, and you're quite right. You have every emotion, both good and bad. And a lot of people make mistakes and never want to be an inventor ever again in their life. The trick is that you make them, and then you learn from them, and you try again. If you keep trying, eventually you'll make some money or you'll do well.
I assume that Duncan, Claire, you've made mistakes yourselves, but survived them. That's the most important thing, isn't it? To survive the mistakes that you make and learn from them.
And it's something you should never be afraid to ask about, I think, because I found that, you know, among different people I've met who've been through the various aspects of taking a product to market, you know, we're all very happy to talk about the mistakes and to say, you know, well, you know, don't do this and be aware of this, because what we sort of thrive on is what we've learned from our mistakes, and we're really happy to kind of spread the word about, you know, what those mistakes were.
Claire, any particular favourite mistakes you'd like to share?
Too many to go through, I think, but actually I do share them because I mentor a lot of people. But it's really being aware of those hurdles around you before they hit you, and learning how to jump them. I'd never jumped a hurdle at school. I was the one that wasn't on the sports field, but actually I've learned how to do it. But you've really got to just be aware of what's around you, and you've got to be aware of these hurdles coming towards you before they do. And that's something that you learn once you hit the first brick wall, is to actually look a bit further than your product, your idea, your thing. You actually open up and you realise you've got to look at your competitors and you've got to understand what's out there. And it's keeping an eye all the time. You have a brilliant idea, but keep an eye all the time on what's going on in the market, because anything can appear at any time throughout your development stage. So you've really just got to be aware that hurdles are there. Go and find your hurdles and be prepared to jump them.
Yeah, so at some point very soon, with an idea, it's guaranteed that either you'll realise you've made a mistake with the original idea, and or you'll meet someone who will say, well, that's great, but if you did this, it would be even better. Yeah. And those things will happen, and those people will be right. And you have to be able to take a deep breath, take a step back and say, oh, okay, yes, that's a great thing to do. Well, that will go on.
I think every project has a bad day where you think, I wish I never started, and you wish you could get back. The trick is you've got to move forward. Sometimes you can't go back. Sometimes you are right. You have a product you know will never make it, and you've got to grow up and say, well, I can't do that anymore, and I've got to do something else. But it takes a lot. And you know, when I mentor at the British Library, I have to be very careful. I can't say I don't like something. I say I like it, but I try and sort of push them into directions where they can see the problems. Not every baby is pretty, if you know what I mean. They have it with sort of rose-coloured glass around the mirror. In fact, babies are quite ugly generally at the beginning. They've got wrinkles, etc. So you've got to be very careful with people. I try to nurture them in the right direction, and nothing worse than I seeing someone have spent thousands of pounds on something and they haven't really got something tangible or viable for the market. And you don't want to break people's hearts, but you want to push them away slightly and look at something else, perhaps. So it's not an easy thing to do.
I wonder whether I could bring in a third of our online participants, Freya, whether there's anything you've heard in the discussion this morning that sort of particularly stuck out for you, or particular things you've learned as a designer that are really important in making great innovations happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The most amazing thing about hearing everyone's stories is how different they are, and you know, a successful product is this complete thing that people see and perhaps are quite intimidated by and think maybe they can't achieve. But I'm, you know, even you say, you know, physical products are more exciting than an app. For me, a physical product is far more exciting. But for some people, apps are. And however it is you start the journey, I think it's if you have got the passion, it's worth starting. And if you fail, you will have learned something from it. But if you really, I think the love is so important. If you don't love it, then it's not going to work. But it's interesting to compare the different approaches from it. Certainly, my story is very similar in some ways and also very different. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to take the plunge and to give it a go, because it's worth it. It's worth it, isn't it? When it works out, it's definitely worth it. The end result, if you can get there, it's worth all the heartache, which there is a lot of, for sure. Yeah.
And I think it's great you're sort of saying about taking the plunge, because I think that's exactly what this sort of program is there to do, to provide the support necessary, but the emotional safety net as well, to say that ultimately what I've heard is a great description, I think, of places like Silicon Valley and other sort of places which are well known for their startup culture, is that they are safe places to do risky things. And that seems like that it's a very important thing to do.
I'd just like to add to that point there, about the rewards, the success. It's not just about the money. Not often you will make money, but it's about the first big reward you get is seeing your product on shelf. Then it's seeing your product being used in the market completely randomly, where you weren't expecting it to be used. And even today, 9 years on from trading, friends text me photos from China of a product in store or being used, and it's still a great, great feeling. I think just the experience, the education, the learning that you can go on such a journey is reward enough. If you can make some money, then that's going to be great. But don't go into it thinking you will make money, because virtually no one does. I mean, Claire, the amount of time and hours that you've put into your product, if you totted all those up and how much money you've made to date, you're on minimum wage if you're lucky. So. So you're not in it to make money. You're in it to really make the world hopefully a better place through your innovation. And that to me is what innovation is about. It's about improving people's lives or products that help contribute to a better style of life through whichever way that might filter its way through to market. Whether it's a cheaper way of getting oil out to the ground through to products like ours on the panel.
A good byproduct is to make money, of course, but also I think a good byproduct I find myself is I travel a lot. You know, I've seen the world with my various inventions, and that's a great thing, really. And quite a lot of it was on the back of getting deals abroad, or going to shows and being invited to various places. So it does make your life much more interesting, certainly.
Right. Sorry, just pulling up some questions here. We've got a question here from Daniel Nelson. If the panel members have one piece of advice to someone with an early stage invention, what would it be?
I'll take advice early. The earlier you can see someone and give them advice, the better, before they take a route they shouldn't. So impartial advice from maybe from a club or from someone who hasn't got an alternative motive after your money, perhaps.
I'd say to pin down really clearly what it is that's really great about their new idea in a very simple way. You know, what's the vision of this product? Because if you're at a very early stage, there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of places where it may change or it may go one way or the other. But if you can sort of clarify down to that really simplest thing, what's great about my idea is this, then that gives you that thing to head towards, and all of the work that will come, that will keep you on track and keep you heading towards what the idea really is.
And that's interesting because it begins to talk about this discussion for me around brand, this idea of here's what I stand for, here's what matters to me. Because we've also got a question here around what's the best way of getting your brand known. Claire, you were certainly talking about that within the baby care market.
Well, I'm still learning. Well, I'll be learning that until the day I put my clogs. Social media. Although that's changing on a daily basis, and you know, you're having to pay for a lot of getting your name out there now, and I don't really agree with it. But social media, from the beginning, start with your story, because that's what people get excited about before you even launch your product. because you can't, otherwise you're starting from a standing still, you know, and it's a hard slog then. So get your social media, get your brand name, and then start your social media on every platform as quickly as possible, and just start little tidbits out there. And it's finding and changing what you're doing every day to learn what works and what doesn't work. There is no book, I wish there was, to tell me how to do it, but you've just got to keep tweaking it, and some things work one day and the next day they don't, and it's just a continual fight 24/7.
So we've got another question here, which is around what's the best way to get my invention seen. And so, Rob, for me, this is an interesting question for you, because we're talking here about inventions and brands at the same time, and how do I get them seen? And could you say a little bit more about that relationship between Trunky as a brand and sort of Trunky as your first product versus your product range? You know, there's a complex relationship here.
There is now, and we've tried to unpick that, and it is challenging. Quite often you'll have a brand or a product that launches with a name, and then it turns into a brand and has other products. But really, for me, getting the brand out there, for us, was about PR. We use traditional PR. This day and age now, magazines, newspapers, a lot more digital. I think we live in very exciting times where social proof is really important. And the great thing we have now, such as on Amazon and on lots of websites where you buy products, is reviews. And I really hope that the reviews and things like that will actually eliminate a lot of the really bad products out there and give a lot more space to products that are great and people love and adore using. And that's probably the most powerful marketing tool there is in this day and age. So if you create a great product that people like, they will talk about it, they will review it, and that's the first keystone in a consumer product market. I think you really need to aim towards.
And that's interesting, because that sort of begins to hint at an answer to another question we've got here. Dragon's Den has shown us that it's easy to get obsessed with your idea, whether it's good or bad. What's the best way of finding out if your idea is good and worth pursuing? So there you're saying, you know, when it is out there, keep on getting that feedback, especially maybe, Claire, as you were saying, you've got to keep on your toes with regard to what the competition is doing. But I suppose we've also been talking here about earlier, before you're not on the market, making sure you are speaking to people. Maybe a little question here is, when do you speak to family and friends? Are they sort of, how do you know a critical friend from someone who will say yes to anything? Or when might you go beyond friends and family to people who you think really could be authentic critical friends? In other words, meaning that they give you constructive feedback rather than either sort of placations, yes, darling, it's lovely, or, you know, they don't give you anything constructive, but just say, I hate it, and don't give you a reason.
We started with, we didn't tell family and friends to begin with. In fact, we didn't tell anybody. And the reason, one of the reasons was that I knew they'd all put their 10 in. And actually, we had our idea. We knew what we were doing. We knew that we were going down the patent route, so that was being developed. So until it came out of there, actually, I didn't want family and friends to know. They knew we were up to something, but they didn't know what, which actually caused a bit of excitement. But to be honest, competitions in the industry really helped us, because they gave us feedback. Winning them was brilliant, but they gave us feedback on, you know, what they liked and what they didn't like about it, and it also gave us PR in the industry before we launched. So that was critical to us coming out to the trade.
It's always interesting to go to a trade show that's, you know, related, or either directly related or in a sideways sense to the market you're considering, and try and talk to a salesperson, you know, because I've certainly found over the years that that's quite often gives you unexpected answers. You know, if you're thinking for a really user-centered design perspective, and then you talk to someone whose whole focus is on what will people buy, and then suddenly you get something different, and that's very, very valuable to be able to feed into whatever you're working on.
Yeah, interesting. And Mark, I assume, as you've said already, they can come and talk to you. But also, are there other places you direct people for feedback?
I'm involved in 3 or 4 different organizations, inventors clubs and organizations. There's quite an underground community, actually, of inventors clubs in the UK, probably about 20, 25 clubs. And they're quite useful. They're non-profit making, where inventors help inventors. And it's quite, as I say, it's quite a social event, and they normally have functions once a month or so. And it's a bit like, I suppose, people standing up saying, I'm an alcoholic. It's a bit like that sometimes. But generally, the community can be very supportive. So you shouldn't be alone in a room for too long. We need to get out more as inventors, yeah? I mean, family and asking advice from family and friends or on your product is not always a good thing. Sometimes you can be reasonably imbalanced, and they see that you're doing all this work and you're getting no money, and it can cause some problems within a family. Sometimes it's best to be a bit open if you can with them. Try and get them on board, because they're going to be bored with it very quickly if you don't, and cause problems at home. Yeah.
I think there's some input here from Satwinder. Hello.
Hi, I just want to follow on from a couple of these points in terms of offering some advice. And I think as a designer, often we're encouraged to be very confident and eloquent and kind of make the pitch, as it were. But I think one really important skill is developing the skill of listening and creating empathy with the people that you're working with, because in doing so, those very special moments, you'll pick up some little golden nuggets of advice or information or how somebody responds. And in doing so, I think that also helps you to build bridges and make links and make networks. And in subsequent conversations, that those are the relationships that you can draw upon and build upon. So for me, the skill of listening and creating empathy is really important. And when we watch Dragon's Den, often the ones that don't succeed are the ones that are being too stubborn, and they're just sort of repeating the same rhetoric, and it's so obvious that they're not going to move forward.
Interesting. Well, so that nicely tees up another question I've got here, which is, Rob and Duncan were designers, but Claire wasn't. Is Design Council's Spark Product Innovation Fund suitable for people without a design background? I think, speaking on behalf of the program, I think the answer is yes. But what I want to get from the panelists and participants is a little of a hint of what the strengths and weaknesses of having a formal training, let's say. And I think, Satwinder, you've said something interesting there, potentially, that those people that feel they have more of a formal training may have a hidden sort of blind spot in perhaps not being able to listen as much as someone who feels that they might feel modestly they know very little, and therefore they have to have more to learn. So I'm fascinated by that sense of when we can be slightly conceited and when we don't listen enough. But where training also is incredibly important, because there is so much to know about this. I think, Freya, you want to pitch in here.
Yeah, I think that when I was at university, I thought networking, I had this really awful idea about networking being this thing where you suck up to designers who are above you, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do that, I'm not going to be a networker. And then you realize that actually it's about finding people who you find inspiring and you can work together to create good things. And I think the point in answer to the question, my education has been very design orientated, but not industrial. But I happened to meet at uni and my partner, design partner, Katrina Sata, who worked, she's a design engineer, and so we complement each other. So even if you yourself are lacking an element that you think is essential, there's a whole country out there of other people who have different skills, and finding the person who sort of complement you can be really important and really make you feel a lot more confident, even if you end up doing a lot of the, even if you don't use them, but having someone there who has other skills is really important to find, and yeah.
So maybe I can ask Claire. So Claire, you were someone who didn't have formal training. Do you wish you had formal training, or actually was your naivety in some ways really important in being open and exploring fully?
No, I don't wish I'd had formal training. I certainly wish I knew now what I knew then, or the other way around, because obviously you learn from your mistakes. But no, I mean, I think it's the Spark Innovation Fund is exactly for people like me, as it is for others. And why I say that is, you can go to designers, and this is going to be a bit, I'm speaking at the Design Council, but you can go to designers and they make these beautiful designs with 11 parts and wings, which actually are not manufacturable, and they can't, you can't get it to market because no one's going to pay the price by the time you get there. I didn't know that. I saw this and thought, wow, that looks amazing. I followed it through with the designer, but actually we simplified it back to 4 parts when I realized we couldn't afford to manufacture it. So I think this kind of thing will give you that support and advice, which will tell you, actually rein in those designers, rein in those branding guys. You don't need to spend £250 on a day to be told that I like Beatles and I like pink. You know, they will give you the advice, and it's so important. So it is definitely for people like me who have just had a eureka moment and have a brilliant idea and want to attempt to get it to market.
Very good. And Duncan, perhaps any sense in which you...
It's again about not being all in with a single focus. You know, we were talking just earlier about this word inventor, but I think part of being an inventor is not necessarily that you're a designer or an engineer or someone in a shed. You know, it's a person who is looking at all of those aspects. You know, in order to invent and create something new, you need to to be the person who's watching the costs, who's making sure that it's technically feasible, but it's also keeping the beauty and the vision and the excitement of the idea of the product alive, and all of that all at the same time.
Spinning a lot of plates. Mark, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think sometimes knowing too much can be go against you. I think sometimes I design things because I don't realize I can't design them, and then when I get to a point where I realize I can't, the trick is getting over it. So sometimes knowing too much can be a problem, really, because to move forward. So, I mean, I have no formal education, really. I'm self-taught, but I'm not bright. I'm just old. I've been around a long time and experienced, and experience really is the key, I think. Yeah. You know, as long as you learn and listen.
And Rob, any final thoughts from you in terms of? Oh, sorry, I think Rob's had to leave us now. So, well, I think that was the sort of the final question for us to answer. I mean, thank you all wonderful panelists, Mark, Duncan, Claire, and Rob. Thank you very much. Thank you also for our online participants, Satwinder, Freya, and Emily. Thank you to all of you who've been viewing more widely and sending in your questions. And really now, all it leaves to me is to close things out. This video will be available via the Design Council YouTube channel in just a moment. You can watch again or send to friends or others who you think might be interested in the fund. Hopefully, and I certainly believe there's been a lot of really important nuggets of information and general sentiment in this dialogue. Also, again, a reminder for the web address is designcouncil.org.uk/spark, and that's where you can find out more about the program. Thank you all very much. Good luck if you're going to be making an entry. Again, entries close on January 31st. Thank you very much all for participating.